So in lesson 1, we did like a general overview on, what are the type of projects that exist. We focused a bit more on IT projects. We talked about types of documentation that a BA will maybe expected to write or participate in writing, depending on the type of projects. We talked about some project terminologies as well. Then in lesson 2, which was yesterday, we talked about business case. Why do we write one? How do we write one? How do we present it? And what are we hoping to achieve when we present it? I did a presentation on business case as well to prepare you for your second assignment, which is where you're going to present a business case of your own. And today we're starting with lesson 3. Lesson 3 is bigger than lessons 1 and 2, so you may take us 2 days for sure, today and tomorrow. That's what I envisage. So let's start with a few key concepts. The reason why it's important for us to understand some of these concepts is that in later lessons, we're going to be referencing them. So you need to understand, what they mean for you to be able to follow, the lessons at that time. So in a project environment, one of the things you hear people say, especially if it's in an agile project environment, and again, I spoke briefly about agile the other day, but in today's lesson, I'll be talking more about agile. What's an epic? An epic is basically a big functionality. What is a functionality? In IT terms, a functionality is something that can be done in a system. It is a function that the system can perform. Okay, so an example of an epic is register for a course, book a flight ticket. Okay, these are called epics because of their size. For example, if you wanted to book a flight ticket, there are many steps that will be involved in booking a flight ticket, right? You go to the website of, excuse me. Yeah, you go to the website of the airline. You'd select the date that you want to travel on. You'd select if you wanted to fly business or economy. You'd also indicate if you were traveling alone or traveling with people. So basically, there are many steps that you're going to need to do for you to get to the point where you'll be able to say, I have booked a flight. Okay? It's a big piece of functionality, basically. The ability to sign up for maybe a program would be another epic. The ability to log in into a system and go through the security verification processes would be another epic. Okay, so when you're thinking about epic and you're trying to remember, what does it really mean? Just think about it is a big piece of functionality that can't be achieved in a jiffy, basically. It will take time, it will take effort to build it. Okay? What is a user story? So typically, in an environment where you hear them talk about epic, you will typically hear them talk about user story as well. What's a user story? A user story is a small unit of work aimed at accomplishing a specific goal within a product. So remember what we said about epic. An epic is big. If we wanted to build an epic, it would take us time. It would take us, typically, it would take weeks to build an epic. It will take weeks to test it. As a matter of fact, they don't even say we're building an epic, right? We talk about user stories. User stories, when we've taken that big epic, we've dissected it into smaller pieces that we can build, incrementally. We build one and then we build another one, and we keep growing the build, basically. A user story describes functionality from the point of view of a user. So usually when you see a user story, and we're going to see a few examples today, when you see a user story, typically would start with as somebody, you know, as a student, as a customer, as a driver, okay? It's a story of somebody who needs to achieve something in the system, okay? And then the next step is it talks about what that user wants to do, the action that the user wants to perform. The third part of the user story is that it talks about what that action, what that person wants to achieve. Okay? So 3 parts. It talks about who does that story apply to? Who is the user involved? They call it the persona. Then it talks about the action that the person wants to perform. And then it talks about the goal. Because an action is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. I want to pay for my sandwich so that, why do I want to pay for it? So that I can walk away with the sandwich and eat it. Okay? A user story is incomplete if it doesn't have all these 3 parts in it. Who does the story apply to? What function do they want to perform? And what do they hope to achieve or accomplish by performing that function? That is a user story. Let's look at a few examples of user stories. As a new user, I want to register by creating a username and password so that the system can remember me. Who's this person? This person is a new user to the system. What do they want to do? They want to register, but they're not registering for fun, right? They want to register by creating a username and password so that when they come back later on to use the system authenticates them, remembers who they are, and lets them in. Okay? One thing I want you to think about here is when you're talking to business, right? When you're gathering requirements from them and they're telling you their story, what they do, what they want to be able to do. If you're working in an agile environment, eventually you're going to need to translate all of that into user stories. So when they're talking to you as a BA, start thinking from a user story standpoint. If you do that, it would help you identify gaps in what they're telling you. Anything they tell you and you cannot identify the owner of the process, you cannot identify what that owner is trying to do, and you cannot identify the purpose why they're doing it, that story is incomplete. You're going to have a problem writing it out as a user story. Let's say, for example, you're meeting with a business and they say, oh, as a new user, I want to register by creating a username and password. Okay, fair enough. But as a BA, you need to think about it. They've told me what they want to do, but they're not telling me why they want to do it, right? Until we know the why, we can't build it. We can't be paying developers to code a functionality, QA to test the functionality, when we don't even know if the functionality is necessary. The way you're going to know if it is necessary or not is this last part of the user story, so that the system can remember me. There always has to be a benefit. That's what I'm trying to say. Let's look at the second user story. As a registered user, I want to log in with my username and password so that I can access the system. So the first user story was about registering, creating an account. Okay? The next user story is about using the system. Now, we know that if you're not a registered user, like with single sign-on, if you're not registered, you cannot log in to click on BA class to join this class, right? So even though you're a user using that system, start thinking about it. How did that system come to be? someone thought these user stories through, right? People need to send in a username, they need to create a password, they will get registered in the system. Then when they come back to use the system, they would enter that username and password, and they will be granted access to the system. The other thing to think about is how sequential these user stories are. As a BA, when you begin to write user stories, don't put the user story for accessing the system before the user story for registering the system. That will be illogical to do. Your user stories need to tell a story. What happens before what? So that if somebody who did not attend the requirement meeting with you, but they're reading your requirement document, it will make sense to them. Like they can follow the logic of what you're doing. Okay? Let's look at the third user story. As a registered user, I want to be able to occasionally change my password so that I can keep it secure. Okay, we're not going to build functionality for you to change your password if we don't know why you want to be able to change it, right? And now we know the reason you want to keep your password secure. As a registered user, I want to be able to request a new password so that I don't permanently lose access to my data if I forget my current password. Imagine using a system where you've been using it for a year, 2 years, you have a lot of information on there, a lot of things you've achieved on that system, but the system does not have the functionality to remember password, reset your password. How painful will that be? Excuse me. Okay, so when you're meeting with a user and they're giving you these user stories, or they're giving you the functionality, they may not tell you about this fourth user story because they're not even thinking about it. But you as a BA, in your experience, you're building a new system where customers external to the organization would need to be able to log in. You'll be thinking about it. What if somebody forgets their password, right? So when you're talking to the people you're gathering the requirement from, you can bring it up. A question would be, so if users forget their password, how do they access the system again? And they'll be like, oh, yes, they need the functionality to be able to reset their password. Sometimes you need to juggle your stakeholders' memory. You need to lead them in the way that they should think. You would never want to create a user story on your own. After all, you're not the user. But if you feel like there's a gap in what they've told you, you find a way to bring it up in your conversation with them. And if they remember it and say, oh, yeah, absolutely, we need that, that will be part of the requirement. Okay? Before we dive a bit deeper into user stories, we're not done talking about user stories. And that is because as a BA, you're going to spend a lot of your time writing user stories if you end up in an agile environment. Okay? But let's briefly look at use case. What is a use case? It is a methodology used to identify, clarify, and organize system requirements. So, a while back, before Agile became a buzzword and everybody was doing Agile and writing user stories, companies were capturing their requirements through use cases, not user stories. But you see, use cases are heavy, and I will get into a bit of detail about it. Unlike a user story that is lean, right? You can see how small a user story is. The user story is basically breaking everything down into small bits that are easily digestible. A use case is different. A use case will talk about something the user wants to do with or through the system. And then it talks about external forces as well, right? Where a user story would say, as a new user, I want to register so that I can access the system, okay? It didn't even make any reference to system apart from so that I can access the system. A use case on the other end we'll talk about the different systems that that user would interface with. An example of the use case is withdraw cash, deposit cash, check balance, deposit check. If there's something you'd notice, about these use cases, they're big. The process of withdrawing cash is big. Remember when you approach an ATM, first you put in your card, then you put in your PIN number. The machine would ask for your PIN number. You'd enter the PIN number. It would verify you, is it the correct PIN number? Then it would display checking, savings. Then you select checking. Then it will tell you to indicate how much money you want to withdraw, and then you'd indicate it, and then it will give you the money, and it will ask you if you need a receipt, and you indicate yes or no. If you indicate yes, it will then print a receipt for you, right? Let's look at the example of a food delivery application for a use case. This is the primary actor. Primary actor is a customer ordering a meal. So it says the user browses restaurant options. Once the preferred restaurant is selected, they place an order through the application. The user pays online or verifies they will pay in person. The order is sent from the application to the restaurant's internal system. The restaurant worker receives and processes the electronic order. See how big this is. This is going to take months for developers to build. Basically, a lot of organizations began moving away from use case. That's not to say there are no organizations out there that are still using it. But because a lot of companies are moving to Agile, in Agile, you want to build small and roll it out. Build a functionality, show it to your customer. Build another functionality, show it to your customer. Get feedback from them. If they need you to improve it, you improve it. You show it to them again. A use case doesn't really give you that opportunity. With a use case, you basically would have to build everything I'm showing on the screen, which would take months before you then go back to the customer and show it to them. So let's say you spent 3 months building this and you go back to the customer and they're like, oh yeah, you know, step 2 is incorrect. We gave you the wrong information. But you've spent 3 months building it. So a lot of rework was happening. And every time you have rework, you're paying people more money. You know, the developers working on it, the BA, the QA. Okay? So let's talk a bit more about Agile. Okay? Because our focus really is we want to spend a lot of time talking about user stories. I should apologize to the class for my cough. There's some construction going on around me. They're raising a lot of dust and I'm just sensitive to it. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about it. I'm just hoping that they finish what they're doing on time. Okay. So Agile, what is Agile? Agile is iterative, okay? Meaning things are done in pieces. If you've heard the word iteration, you know, and iteration basically means you build something, right? It's like, let's take the example of baking a cake, right? Let's say you're new to baking cake, but you want to bake for customers and you want them to pay you, okay? You bake the first cake. Of course, you're not going to make it a 10-layer cake, right? Your goal is to build a 10-layer cake. But your first time building it, you're not going to go out and build a 10-layer cake. So you build maybe a 5-inch cake or a 10-inch cake, 1 layer, right? And you show it to your customer and you get feedback from them. They're like, oh, it's fluffy the right way, or oh, it's too hard, or you need a bit more butter, you need this, you need that. Then you take it back, incorporate the feedback that they gave you, rebake the cake, and take it to them. Now it's going to be better. Maybe not perfect, but it will be better. Okay? So we're basically working towards building a 10-layer cake. But we're not going to build the entire 10-layer before we take it to the customer. We're going to say in these 2 weeks, we're going to build this one layer cake. We're going to present it to the customer and we're going to get feedback. Okay, you see that I use the word sprint in here. Sprint is one of the terminologies they use in an agile environment. A sprint is a time frame during which the team is going to build a selected number of user stories. Like I said, a sprint will go anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. For that sprint, before day one of the sprint, as a team, we're going to decide on how many user stories we want to implement in that sprint. Okay? We implement them in that sprint. An example would be we're going to build register, we're going to build access the system, and we're going to build remember password or change password. We're going to build the 3. Okay? When we build the 3, it may not come out perfect. We're going to get the business, the people who gave us the requirement. We're going to show to them what we've built. We're going to say, go into the system and play with it and give us feedback. Okay? Another thing to know about Agile is an approach and a mindset. It's a way of thinking. So there may be textbooks out there that will tell you about Agile, or a list of instructions or even a certification. But Agile in its true sense is not a certification. There are no instructions. It just means build small, get feedback, be agile. When you say human being is agile, they're up and going. Okay? Agile is about efficient communication over documentation. So in agile environments, you typically would not see 100-page documentation. I mean, they really shouldn't be. In Agile, they'd say, if I can come to your office and chat with you for 1 minute, I don't need to put in an email. Unless, of course, I want it in an email so that if you tell me later on you didn't say what you said, well, it's in the email, right? But the whole idea of Agile is efficient communication over documentation. Talk to people, and that's why good BAs get comfortable talking to people. That's why a lot of our, we're going to have 3 presentations, right? Because we want to get you talking. Agile is about producing tangible working results after each iteration. We want to produce something that we can go show to our stakeholders. In general terms, think of it as you're a writer. You're writing a book. You're not going to wait till you think the book is perfect before you show it to somebody to read. When you write chapter 1, you're going to show it to somebody, whoever, people in your network or your mentors or your editor, right? They're going to review, they give you feedback, and then you go back and incorporate the feedback. Okay? You're not thinking of delivering, I'm going to spend 1 year writing this book, it's going to be so perfect. Only to find out after 1 year that what you've written is irrelevant. It has become irrelevant in the 1 year you were spending writing it. Life moved on. Okay? So let's simplify Agile here. Everybody knows about build your meal, right? You go to Subway, they say, what size of bread do you want? You indicate, and then you begin to pick what you want what you want them to put in there. Do you want more cheese? Do you want less cheese? What type of bread do you want? Okay? Do you want tomatoes? Do you want lettuce? That is iterative. Compared to you go to a restaurant and you're like, I want to order a burger. And I know I gave that example the other day. I want to order a burger, and that's what you tell them, and they run with it and they prepare a burger and put meat in it, but you're vegetarian. That burger has been prepared. Somebody is going to need to eat that cost. Either you're paying for it, even though you're going to trash it, or you reject it and they trash it and they're paying for it. In a project, we're always looking for how not to waste money. And so people are going the Agile way. And one of the things they're practicing is iterations. Okay? Every step of the way, your food project manager checks in with you to make sure your food project is still on track. Basically, you're going to get a delicious meal that was improved each step thanks to the face-to-face collaboration, right? You're standing in front of them and you're giving them the requirements and they're implementing it. Another way to think about iterative is if you use an iPhone or Android, right? You have an application, you have several applications on your phone, okay? I see there is a lot going on in the chat room. Sorry, 1 second, I'm just checking the chat. Okay, all is well. I was just wondering why there were so many things there. Another way to think about iterative is on your phone, you have many apps on there. From time to time, they roll out updates, right? This app has an update, that app has an update. Imagine if Android waits till the end of time to be able to give you the perfect app. No, nobody's going to think Android is a big deal, right? Or even Apple. But you know what? They give you what they consider the best today, even though they know that best is not perfect. They're not going to wait till 2050 to give you a perfect application. They're going to give you the best they can give you now. But rest assured, in 24 hours, if they find a need to roll out an update because what they've given you is not perfect, they will roll it out. Okay? And that's the methodology that a lot of projects are following. It's called iterative building. You don't wait till it's perfect before you roll. I mean, it has to be decent enough. You're not just going to roll out something that isn't decent, but you're not waiting for it to be perfect. As a matter of fact, to get it to that perfect level you're aiming at, you need feedback. But the only way to get feedback is to put it in front of people, put it in front of users who would use it and give feedback. Okay? So I hope we're following along. Let's talk about some of the principles of Agile. Agile prioritizes customer satisfaction through early and continuous software delivery. We know that this project is going to take 1 year. We're not going to wait till the end of 1 year before we take that solution back to the people we got the requirements from. As a matter of fact, the way we're going to be getting the requirements is that we will get a fair bit of requirements upfront. And as we build, right, when developers are working, in some cases, a BA would continue to gather requirements, meeting with stakeholders, documenting the requirements for the development team to develop. Agile accommodates changing requirements throughout the development. Now, when we talk about changing requirements, we mean it to the extent that the change is not going to, set the project back 3 months. We don't mean the type of change where something we delivered in January, which you've accepted, you come back in July and say that is no longer the case. Even as flexible as Agile is, that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, what we're talking about here is that because you're constantly interfacing with your stakeholders, as you're having those conversations with them, they will remember new things, right? Or a new stakeholder might even be introduced into the mix who will give you requirements that the other stakeholders did not think to share with you. But because you're working in an agile environment where you're able to embrace change, and by you, I mean the entire project team, I don't mean just a BA, right? You're delivering, you work for 2 to 4 weeks and you show it to them. If they need to make a change, you're going to find out immediately, compared to if you spent 1 year, you take everything, go start building it for 1 year. By the time you show it to them at the end of 1 year, they're like, oh no, you misunderstood what I told you. This was what I meant. But that part that they're talking about was built 9 months ago. That's one of the things Agile saves you from, okay? Because you're working iteratively, you're meeting with the customer from time to time. If anything changes, you're going to find out early enough for the change to be accommodated. Agile prides itself on delivering working software. And by that, we mean working software consistently. Okay? At the end of every sprint, we're building something. After one or more sprints, we've built a functionality that we can take to the business and say, oh, we've built the login page. Test it and give us feedback. Agile focuses on collaboration between the business and the project team. Again, constant communication. A lot of the times, though, that communication between the business and developers goes through the BA. Developers typically don't like talking to the business because they find it difficult understanding them. Okay. Agile keeps people motivated. It builds trust and support. People feel more heard in Agile. Imagine working with the business, building a product, and as they're talking to you, giving you newer requirements, they are seeing the progress of development. Even they are encouraged. It won't be too difficult to get their buy-in into the solution. And then Agile enables face-to-face interactions, so as a BA, in this time of remote work, a lot is done over Zoom. Sometimes the camera is turned on, other times the camera isn't turned on. But before COVID, there was a lot of face-to-face interaction in companies that practice Agile. Okay. In Agile, a working software is the primary measure of success. If you claim you're doing Agile, but you're not delivering working software from time to time, you're doing something else. You just labeled it Agile to make you feel good, but that is in Agile. Agile has a consistent development phase. Every sprint, we have a set of stories we're developing. In sprint 1, we develop these 5 user stories, then we push it to the testers. Now the developers are free. They take another 5 user stories, they're developing it, while the testers are testing the initial 5 user stories, okay? So there is like that consistent development phase. You can almost tell what's going to happen because everything is planned, okay? The attention that's paid to technical detail and design enhances agility. And what do we mean by that? When we're doing Agile, right, the BA is doing their job, engaging the stakeholders, getting the requirements. Sometimes you do the wireframing that we talked about the other day. You share all of that with the technical team. The technical team discuss it, they digest it, okay, and then they go ahead, they develop it. When they develop it, the sprint they develop may not match your wireframe 100%, okay? But you can take a screenshot of what they've developed and you show it back to the business, and the business will be like, oh, we like it. Or they'll say, oh, can you move the login button? Can you move it up here? Can you move that up there? You take that back, you take it to the developers again. There's constant feedback and fixing. Feedback, incorporate the feedback. Show it back to the business. Is there more feedback? If there's more feedback, document the feedback, show it to the developers. And that circle goes on until that functionality, until the stakeholders are happy with it. Agile is simple. We don't overcomplicate things. The stories are small enough. User stories need to be small. They need to be really small. If your user story is big, it needs to be divided. Okay? For companies that practice Agile, the teams are self-organizing, meaning they don't, even though you have a project manager or you have a Scrum Master, they don't tell you what will be built. Okay? The developers are the ones building the story, so they have a say in it. If there's a product owner, the product owner understands, knows really well the priorities of the business, so they have a say in it. And because everybody is contributing based on their strength, it makes things work faster. There's trust, there's respect, and there's clarity on who should do what and when. One of the things that we do in Agile is that we constantly reflect on, okay, so in the last sprint, this was what we did, and this was how well we did. This is what we could have done better. We're going to put all of that into consideration so that when we go into the next sprint, we're doing it better. Like each sprint should be better than the previous one. So that regular reflection helps the team become more effective. Okay, so let's talk about increment. In Agile, increment is one of the key words that you would hear as well. What is increment? Increment is a developmental approach that divides a solution into fully working subset of functionality. I know that's a bit packed. Each increment builds on prior increments. So what's an increment? Let's go back to as a matter of fact, we have an example down here. You go into a restaurant and you're very hungry. It's 6 p.m. You've been working all day. You haven't had anything to eat or even drink. And you've had like 7 meetings already. You are very hungry. You get into the restaurant. They give you the menu. You select what you want, appetizer, main meal, and dessert. Let's say that your main meal is so big that it will take them, 45 minutes to an hour to prepare, appetizer, maybe 15 minutes, and your dessert. Desserts typically won't take a long time. Maybe you're just ordering ice cream, right? Given how hungry you are, realistically, are you going to want to wait for them to get everything ready before they bring it to you? Or would you better appreciate, like, even if it's the appetizer, just bring it and let me eat? Okay? Now, I said that story to get us thinking about increment. An increment is when you're building, at least in IT project, right? Is when you're building in bits. Don't confuse that with iteration. Iteration is a way of improving what you've done before. So you're a baker, right? That's the example we gave. You're going to bake a 10-layer cake. Each layer of the cake is an increment. But a particular layer that you're trying to make perfect is an iteration. So you build it the first time, you show it to the customer, and they say, oh, it tastes nice, but it's a bit too firm. Can you make it softer? So you go back and you bake it again, work on the ingredients a bit, and the cake comes out softer. You're still building one layer of cake, just that you're improving on it. That's an iteration. An increment is, okay, we're building 10 layers of cake. We start with the first layer. We show it to the customer. They're like, oh, perfect size. The, what's it called? The icing is perfect. The dish is perfect. Then you build layer 2, which will be slightly smaller than the bottom layer, right? And you show it to them and you get feedback. That is increment. You're building incrementally. You're increasing what you're building. That is incremental building. An example from a user story standpoint is build the login page, then build reset password, build the functionality to register for the BA class, build the functionality to attend the BA class. That is incremental. Whereas iteration would be, we built the login, the register page. We show it to the users and they're like, it's just not user-friendly. I had to look for 2 minutes for me to figure out where to click. And they tell you, can you move this here? Can you move that there? You take it away, improve it based on the feedback they gave you, and then show it to them again. That's iteration. Okay? So let's go back to our text here. Each increment builds on prior increments, ensuring that all increments work together. Okay? To provide value, the increment must be usable. What we mean by that is, when you build login page, complete the login page, complete register. You cannot show register functionality to the user if they cannot complete that registration, right? If they cannot complete it, it means it is not usable. So your increment must be usable. Within one sprint, you can create multiple increments depending on how big they are and how big your sprint is. Like I said, a sprint can go from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. You as the BA, you're not the one determining how many increments or how many user stories are going to be built in the sprint. As a matter of fact, when the developers are selecting the user stories and saying we can build 5 user stories, there is no expectation for you to talk as a BA because you're not the one building it. You don't know how much effort they're going to put into it. What they need from you is for the user stories to be well written, documented in the right tool. If your company uses Jira, get the user stories into Jira and attend the meeting where they're talking about the user story because they may have questions about the user story. For them to be able to say, oh, within the next sprint, we're going to do user story 100, they need to understand what user story 100 is. So when they're meeting and they're talking about it and they don't fully understand it, they may ask you, after all, you're the one who wrote the user story. They may ask you for more information about it to help them understand it. But they would not expect you to say, okay, yeah, you're building this user story now. That's not your decision to make as a BA. Work cannot be considered part of an increment unless it meets the definition of done. So when you're saying, oh, yes, we completed this increment, right? That increment has to be done. There's something called definition of done, meaning these 5 user stories that are in this increment, this is what needs to happen for us to say, you know what, we delivered. Okay? Because a developer can build a login page and the user will be like, this is useless. We can't use it. It needs to be improved on. It means that user story has not met the definition of done. That raises the question, how do I know what done is? You need to work with the business to get the definition of done. What does done mean to the business? Ask the business, for this requirement you gave me, which I've documented in this user story, what needs to happen for you to give us a green check mark to say you completed it? That definition of done needs to come from the people who gave you the requirements. Okay? So we've talked about iteration, a process where the design of a product or application is improved by repeated review and testing. You know, we work on it, we build, we test it, we get feedback, we make changes based on the feedback. So we begin by designing, then we build it, then we test it. Remember, we're testing the tiniest version of what we have in mind. We're not waiting till perfection. As fantastic as our company is, it's probably nowhere as big as Apple, right? But even Apple builds in iteration. Like I said earlier, that's why you keep getting this upgrade and this version, okay? You then show it to the client and you collect feedback. If it was well received, you keep it and you expand on it in the next iteration. If the solution was not well received, because yes, there are times where you build stuff and it will not be well received. What they were trying to tell you and what was built are not, you know, they're not the same. And so they're going to give you that feedback. You as the BA will take it back to the team so that it can be worked on and improved on. So I talked about the example of baking a cake. You bake a cake, you present it to the client, you get feedback, you improve on the cake, you represent it to the customer. I think that's a simple logic to follow. Just always remember it when you're working on a project. If it's in an agile environment, perfection is not expected, at least not immediately. Early feedback is going to gain you more ground, gain the project team more ground than trying to perfect a functionality. Okay? Now, increment versus iteration. I know that a lot of people confuse it, so I just want to talk about it a bit more. An iterative process makes progress through continuous refinement, while an incremental process makes progress through small working deliverables. One, the iterative, is talking about how to make it better, how to improve on it. Whereas the other one, which is incremental, is looking at how to deliver early. So let's go back to the example of an Android phone. You already have a lot of apps on your phone, but soon enough in the future, another app is going to be rolled out. One company developed this great product, Android partners with them, now you can put it on your Android phone. That's incremental. Android is not, like I said earlier, Android is not waiting 10 years to see, what are the different applications people can build. Let's get all the applications, put it on our phones before we start selling phones. No, they're selling phones. And if a new application comes in, then they push it to the user. They push it to the customer. They're not waiting. They're continuing on. They're making money. They're trying to keep people happy. Okay? And even for the products, the applications that already exist, if a better way or if an improvement, if they develop an improvement of the application, then they push it out to you. So in iterative, you build a solution or a product and you refine it to make it better. In incremental, you build and release one feature at a time, depending on priorities defined by the customer. So here is a picture that tries to show the difference between incremental and iteration. Let's start from the top, incremental. So what we have at the top left looks like an L shape, right? A pretty light L shape. The next one, we see there is a box to the right of the L shape. So now our shape is getting bigger, right? And then the third shape on the top, we can see there's this little box to the bottom right. That's incremental. We're growing it, okay? But if you look at the bottom, which is iterative, the three images we have, they're all three boxes. The only difference is, if you look at the second, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but for the iterative development, the middle shape, you can see that the square is darker, meaning we've improved on it from where it was the last time. And then if you look to the right, it is much darker again. That is increment versus iterative. Okay. So let's talk a bit about product owner. Many projects have a product owner, even when they have a BA. At least I've worked on a project where I was the BA, one of the BAs, and they had a product owner. A product owner is usually somebody that knows the business really well, really, really well, to the point that when the BA is done gathering requirements, right, and we are now in the process of building, for a project that has a product owner, the product owner would attend meetings with the development team. And if you have questions about some of the requirements, even as a BA, let's say even the BA now has a question, right? Usually the product owner is able to answer the question. If they can't answer it, they can get clarification from the business. Not every project has a product owner. As a matter of fact, in some organizations, the BA is the product owner. They don't have a BA, they call them product owner. In some places, the job title is BA, but the BA is doing the job of a product owner. Okay? What does a product owner do? A product owner organizes the product backlog into specific releases that delivers a functionality. What is a product backlog? So think about it this way. We have a product we're trying to build. We've gathered about 200 requirements for the product, by meeting with the different stakeholders, the accounting team, the finance team. We've had all of these meetings, right? And now we have a list of 200 requirements. So our organization uses Jira. And so we go into Jira and we put all of these requirements in there. That is a product backlog. Like all of those many requirements you have, right? They relate to the product you're trying to build. However, when you want to start building it, it becomes really difficult figuring out, are we going to build user story 150 or 155? Like, how do we select it? Okay? The product owner goes in to that backlog and organizes the user stories, right? Let's say we have 10 user stories that deal with register, login, reset password, and anything that has to do with the user accessing the system. They can group all of that together. Let's say we have 15 user stories that have to do with selecting a product and making payment. They'll group all of that together as well. The product owner also decides what is built and when it is built. Now, by saying decide what it is, what is built, what we mean here is they have a major say in the part of the product that we're going to be building next. They do not necessarily get to select a particular user story. So the first point, we talked about them grouping the stories into releases, right? So let's say for this release, there are 20 user stories in there. The product owner does not have the power to say, oh, for these 20 user stories, we're going to start with number 8, then we go to number 9, then we go to number 5. No. Only the people actually building it, and by build, I mean coding, the programming, right? They are the ones who have the right to determine, is it going to be user story 8 or user story 12? Sometimes the product owner may be the business analyst or a seasoned subject matter expert or end user. Who's a subject matter expert? The subject matter expert is an expert in the subject we're talking about. Just like the title says, the requirements we're talking about is for the accounting department or for the payroll department. If we needed a subject matter expert on that topic, it will be somebody from the payroll department who works with a lot of the processes in payroll and understands it really well to be able to communicate the requirements. The product owner monitors the performance of the team within the sprint. How well are we doing? Did we select more user stories than we can deliver? Did we select too few, not enough user stories to deliver? They basically just see how the team is doing. Bear in mind what I said earlier. Sometimes the product owner is the PA. Okay? So your work is not going to end at gathering requirements. You're also going to do most of what is listed on this slide. So just a few things to note about a product owner in case you end up being one. A product owner defines the vision of what we're trying to achieve in this sprint. They manage the product backlog, they prioritize needs, they oversee development stages, how are we doing from a development standpoint. They anticipate what the client needs. What is the next functionality that the client would like to see? Of course, all of the requirements came from the client, but from a prioritization standpoint, what is most important to the client? All 200 user stories cannot be delivered at the same time. So there has to be a logic for selecting which will be delivered first. The product owner acts as a primary liaison between the business and the development team. They evaluate the product progress, how well are we doing again with the development, the testing, and with showing it to the business to get feedback. A product owner participates in the daily scrum. Again, remember, they participate. They do not lead it, but they participate. They attend it at the minimum. A product owner can terminate a sprint, if a sprint isn't going well, or there's a valid reason for terminating the sprint. The user stories are incorrect, there's a misunderstanding of the requirement, the team is going off the rails, a product owner can terminate a sprint. Okay, again, always remember, this could be you as a BA. If you get hired on a project that does not have a product owner, rest assured you are going to be the product owner. The expectation is that you will do most, if not all, of these things that we've listed here. Next, we talk about product backlog. The product backlog, we talked about it briefly, it's the master list of all requirements for the product. All requirements to the point that you've gathered it, right? Because in an agile environment, you're not spending a ton of time gathering all of the requirements before you start building. No, you're not doing that. You're going to gather a lot of requirements upfront to keep the ball rolling for the developers and QA to have work to do. And then you will continually work with the business to gather more requirements. That's why it is called agile. Okay. Usually the product owner and the team write obvious requirements, oftentimes enough for first sprint. So even though you come together and you write requirements that are obvious, right? For example, your customers need to be able to access the system. These requirements still need to be validated by the end user, okay? Because you're not the user. It needs to be validated and verified by the business. Then over time, as the BA continues to meet with the stakeholders, the product backlog begins to grow and it changes as more is learned about the product and its customers, right? Sometimes you begin gathering requirements as a BA and it be going really smoothly. Then in month 2, they're going to give you one requirement and something about that new requirement just doesn't sit well with you. And so you go back and you check the requirements they gave you in month 1 and you realize that this new requirement actually conflicts with the prior requirement. Okay? And so what do? You take it back to the business for them to validate it. So initially, you told me that returning customers would always get a 20% discount for additional products that they're buying. However, in my meeting with you yesterday, you indicated that the maximum discount we would ever give a customer is 10%. Can you please validate these 2 requirements and tell me which one of them is valid? Okay. Now, when they tell you what is valid, obviously you're going to go back to your team. You're going to update the requirement. Hopefully, it's not something you developed 6 months ago, in which case you're going to need a change request. Okay. So here is, a picture that kind of shows what we mean when we say a product backlog or a project backlog. So we have the project team at the top here. And then we have the product owner and we have stakeholders. In the product, or also called product backlog, you have a really long list of the many requirements that you've gathered so far. However, when you want to start developing the user stories, when the programmers want to start building the functionality, they don't pick user stories from the project backlog. Whichever user stories will be built in a sprint need to be moved into the sprint backlog. So when we get into Jira, you're going to be able to see what I'm talking about. Think about it like a bucket and a cup. All of the many requirements you gathered will be saved in the bucket. However, you are never going to select from the bucket to build. Okay? For you to build anything, you're going to determine which sprint it is going into. Then you'd move the stories into that sprint, which is called the sprint backlog. And that is where the programmers will select the user story that they're going to build in that sprint. Okay, I know you may have a lot of questions about what I'm talking about. Please just hold on to those questions. I will address them all. Okay. So we have something called a minimum viable product. A minimum viable product is the minimum that is acceptable. The simplest version of the solution that could work. The goal is to get it into the hands of users early so that you can get feedback on if you're on track or you're completely off track. The other thing the minimum viable product helps you with is that you're able to then move on to the next most important thing. In IT project management, as a BA, you always have to think about minimum viable product. The reason is that every time you meet with stakeholders to gather requirements, they are going to give the impression that every requirement is very important, and if you don't give it to them, they can't function. It is not true. Of course, you're not going to tell them it is not true, but you're always going to wear the hat of MVP. What is the minimum that can work for what they need? What's the minimum that if we delivered it to them, it would still work? Okay. So an example of that would be that you wanted a car, you wanted to buy a car. You know how like the latest cars are very fancy today. And I mean, they're fantastic really when you drive them. But a lot of those extras have nothing to do with driving the car. Like if the car didn't have all of those extras, it would still get you from point A to point B. A car with gold rings is not a minimum viable product. Withdrawing cash at the ATM, where the ATM will verbally ask you questions, is not a minimum viable product. It's just extras to make the customer feel like a VIP. But a customer could still withdraw money without the ATM, without, the ATM, speaking to them. The ATM could just display the questions on the screen. The reason why this is important is that as a BA, as you talk to the customers and you gather the requirement, even you need to begin to think about it. Is there a requirement they're giving me that if we don't deliver it, the project will not fail? Okay? It's something that a BA needs to think about. So let's talk a bit more about a Scrum team. So we talked about sprint earlier, right? In an agile environment, the teams are typically called a Scrum team. So in a Scrum team, you may have a product owner or just a BA or both. You have a Scrum Master, a developer, QA, designer. You may have a few other people, a solution architects, and all of that, right? But it's primarily the development team. And by development team, we don't mean developers like programmers alone. Even a BA is part of the development team. You're part of the team that is working towards delivering a product. So you're part of the development team. So one of the ceremonies that happen in an agile environment is called Scrum. A Scrum is a daily meeting where the team members, the Scrum team members, answer the following questions. What did you work on yesterday? What will you work on today? And are there any obstacles or impediments in your way that's stopping you from getting your work done? So what would happen typically is that a Scrum holds every day. Scrum team members come together, usually stand in a circle. Usually you should be standing in a Scrum. The Scrum is supposed to be a very short meeting. And so that's one of the reasons they don't sit, because when people sit down, they're comfortable and they don't know when to stop talking. So usually you stand. A scrum, depending on the size of the team, how many people, may last anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes. It's not a long meeting at all, but it happens every day. And everybody will get to answer what they did yesterday, what they'll be working on today, and if they have any issues. The reason you're going to talk about any obstacles or impediments you have is that the product owner or the scrum master may be able to help you address it. As a BA, you want to always have something to say. An example of what you say is yesterday, you met with the accounting manager, you worked on requirements for this particular functionality, mention the name of the functionality. Today, you're going to be refining the requirements that you gathered. And do you have any obstacles in your way? An example of an obstacle would be when you're done meeting the accounting department, you plan to meet the finance department, but they haven't responded to any of your meeting requests. Okay? Or another obstacle might be you're currently working on the accounting department. There's a document you've been asking them to send to you. It's been over 2 weeks and they haven't sent it. Okay? So basically, any obstacle, any impediment, anything that will slow your work down is what you want to talk about here. What is the role of a Scrum Master? A Scrum Master ensures the Scrum is on track and helps resolve problems that may arise during the Scrum. So all the obstacles and the impediments that people mention in the meeting, the Scrum Master will basically work to help them resolve it. A sprint typically lasts anywhere from 2 weeks to 4 weeks. Okay? It's time boxed to deliver a specific set of user stories and produce working software. Time boxed means that once as a team in our organization, we've decided that our sprints will be 2 weeks, we are going to box that time. 2 weeks, right? Whatever we're delivering in that 2 weeks is what we're delivering. We're not going to add anything to it. And we're not going to exceed 2 weeks. If for any reason we're only 90% done by the end of the 2 weeks, whatever is left, we're moving it out of that sprint. That sprint must end on the last day of the 2 weeks. And if it's 3 weeks or 4 weeks, whatever organization is doing. During a sprint, user stories can be removed. However, no new user stories can be added. This allows the project team to focus on the goals of the sprint. So every sprint has a goal. The goal of this sprint is that our users will be able to register, or our users will be able to log into the system. That is the goal. So every user story we select to add to that sprint must lead to that goal that we've defined. Okay? If for any reason we find out that we've put too many user stories in the sprint that we can deliver, we can remove them, but we cannot go to the product backlog to go pick a new user story and add to the sprint once the sprint has begun. A sprint goal is a brief explanation of what the team plans to achieve during the sprint. It's a tangible goal written together by the team and the product owner, and it is time bound to the duration of the sprint. What that means is that we've determined that our sprint is going to be 2 weeks, right? The goal that we set out to achieve, we need to achieve it within the 2-week period. Okay, let's look at sprint backlog. So I showed you a picture of, just a sample of what a sprint backlog, a product backlog looks like. And then to the right of it, it had a sprint backlog that had, I think it was 3 or 4 user stories in it. A sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal, the set of product backlog items that were selected for the sprint, which is the what, as well as an actionable plan for delivering the increment, the how. So the sprint goal includes the why, which is the goal, the goal we have for this sprint. That's the reason why we have this sprint. Then the what, the user stories that we pulled from the product backlog, and then how we plan to deliver it. The sprint backlog is highly visible. It's a real-time picture of the work that the developers plan to complete during the sprint to achieve the sprint. Okay? Anybody that's part of the project team can log into Jira and view the sprint goal. Every sprint should have a goal. The team cannot just select random stories that have nothing to do with one another and say they have a sprint. It doesn't really work that way. So let's talk about the sprint planning meeting. I've talked a lot about what goes into a sprint, but we need to plan it for us to be able to get the goal, and these are the stories and all of that. We need to come together to talk about it. So there's something called the sprint planning meeting. It occurs at the beginning of each sprint. The team decides on what they will be delivering in the sprint. Okay? So here's where we talk about the sprint goal, the functionality that we're going to be delivering. Who attends the meeting? The product owner, scrum master, project team, and other crucial stakeholders such as the subject matter expert. They all come together to attend the sprint meeting to talk about, okay, in the next 2 weeks, this is what we plan to achieve. Okay. The product owner or the BA describes the highest priority features to the team. Based on everything that's left to be built, these ones are the highest priority. Of the stories that the product owner identifies as the highest priority, the developers or programmers identify and discuss what each of them can deliver. Every man must speak for themselves, but at this point, only the programmers are talking, not the BA, not the QA, not the product owner or the scrum master. It is the actual programmers. They are the ones that know their capabilities, right? And so they would indicate what they can deliver. Let's say you have 3 developers on your team. The user stories that the developers selected will then be moved from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. The development team will then commit to the scope of the sprint. The scope of the sprint is basically the user stories they themselves indicated that they can deliver. Okay? The team and the product owner define the goal of the sprint, which is a short description of what the team plans to achieve during the sprint. These 5 things happen at the sprint planning meeting. The sprint itself has not started at this point. Let's say the sprint is starting on Monday, next Monday. We will have the sprint planning meeting sometime this week to plan that sprint that we're starting on Monday. Okay. When you're attending a sprint planning meeting as a BA, go prepared. Know your user stories. After all, you're the one who put the user stories in Jira. But the estimating of the size of the user story is not yours to do. The most important thing for your role is to know the user stories well enough, because they will put you on the spot. You're going to be in a meeting with maybe 9 other people, 3 developers, 2 QAs, product owner, this person and that person. When they begin to look at the user stories to determine which user stories they want to move to the sprint backlog, they'll begin to dissect it. And if anybody is not clear on what you mean by the user story, they're going to ask you right there in the meeting. In some situations, you may tell them, let me get back to you on that. You've raised a very important question and I want to make sure I'm giving you the right answer. But that cannot be your answer all the time. So it means that when you're writing your user stories, understand it well to the point that if somebody wakes you up from a nap and they ask you about the user story, you can respond to the question. Generally, though, not focusing on the BA here. When people attend the sprint planning, they need to go prepared with data and estimated story point. Estimated story point means every user story is going to be allocated a point. And what it means is that this is how big this user story is. For example, a new user registering may be size 10. Meanwhile, reset password may be size 5. Okay? And that's what we mean by story point. 2, in a sprint planning meeting, the estimated story points for all items in the backlog are confirmed. The team then agrees on the items to move to the new sprint. That sprint starting on Monday. Number 4, the team determines the capacity for the upcoming sprint and compare it with total story points proposed. Let's say the sprint starting on Monday, sprint 5. So we've done 4 sprints already. The average number of points we've completed per sprint is 30. If all of a sudden our developers are selecting stories for sprint 5 and the stories they've selected so far have a total of 50 points, that's a red flag. As a BA, it's okay for you to speak up and say, going by our current velocity, going by our current speed, based on the 4 sprints that we've done, 50 points is a bit high for the next sprint. What is the logic for selecting 50? Okay. Number 5, the meeting ends with a question and answer session to ensure that all team members are on the same page. By the end of the sprint, the entire team needs to have an agreement on what we're doing in the next sprint. Again, a sprint planning meeting, what are the things you need to focus on as a BA? Number 1, you may be tasked with scheduling the meeting, okay? You will need to make sure the user stories are in the product backlog because that is where the team will be looking to pick the user story from. Number 3, you need to be ready to explain the user story if they need more information after reviewing it in the sprint planning meeting. Okay. I'll go over 1 or 2 more slides and we'll go into question and answers. Sprint review meeting. The sprint review meeting is held at the end of the sprint, and that is where the team will evaluate their success against the sprint goal. So first we talked about sprint planning meeting. It happens before the sprint begins. However, after the sprint ends, we have a sprint review meeting where we look back and say, oh, this was our goal. Did we achieve it? The team will then demonstrate the completed user stories to the product owner. So the developers or the programmers who built the solution will basically show on the screen what they've built. The login page, they try to register, they try to reset password. They basically show it to the product owner. Okay. There's another meeting called the sprint retrospective. This meeting occurs at the end of the sprint, like the sprint review meeting. However, it's a very different meeting. The questions we're seeking to answer in a sprint retro meeting is what went well in the sprint? What did not go well? What are the areas where we need to improve? A sprint retro meeting is looking at the team. How is the team doing? Whereas a sprint review meeting is looking at the product, okay? For this sprint, we set out to achieve this goal. Did we achieve it? That will be discussed in the sprint review meeting. However, in the sprint retrospective meeting, we're looking at the team. How is the team doing? Are we trying to do too much? Are we overcompensating? Did anything go wrong? What could we have done better as a team? Okay, how is the team doing, basically? Very important to know the difference between those. Sprint review and sprint retrospective. Sprint retrospective cares about the people. Sprint review cares about the products. These are all Scrum ceremonies. All these meetings I'm talking about: sprint planning, sprint review, sprint retrospective. So when you get on the job and they're talking about the Scrum ceremonies, these are the ceremonies right here. Lingo is very important, people. When you get on the job, they will assume you know these terminologies. They're not going to tell you about a sprint retro meeting and be explaining to you. They'll say, oh, Abiola, for the next sprint, we need you to please set up the sprint review meeting, the sprint retro, you know, and they would expect you to know these things. So please, again, I know it's a lot of information. Read it over again, watch the videos, know the difference between each one. Okay? Story points. So I mentioned story points earlier. Story points is a way of estimating a user story. Different companies use different methods of estimation. Basically, all the different organizations are trying to achieve is how much work can we do in this sprint or in this iteration? How much work can we do? Okay? Some teams will use, I'm trying to remember the names of there's like at least 10 different ways. I believe I may have one of them in my slide. Okay? But the bottom line is that they will assign a point to every user story, and then they will add up all those story points. They're called story points, points of the user story, right? Story points. The project team can then establish its velocity for future iteration planning. What we mean by that is that, let's say we're doing sprint 1. We're going to select 5 user stories. User story 1 is 3 points. User story 2 is 5. User story 3 is 7. User story 4 is 7. User story 5 is 7. Okay? That, I believe, is 29 points in total. Let's say, and our sprint is 2 weeks, right? And we completed all 29 story points in 2 weeks, right on time, right? It took us the entire 2 weeks to complete it. When we're going into sprint 2, we're going to try to make sure that we don't select user stories that are much higher than 29, because it took us 2 full weeks to do 29, right? But let's say in sprint 2, we were able to complete 29 user stories in a week and a half. Now we're looking at the average of 1 and 2 to be able to determine our pace. Pace cannot be determined in the first sprint. You need to do a couple sprints and then look back and say, okay, this is how fast we're going. Therefore, in the future, this is the number of story points that we're going to select. Story point estimates need to be owned collectively by the team. Like, the team must agree. One person cannot say, no, we can do 30, and another person says 40, and another person says 20. There is a gap in someone's knowledge if that happens. And that meeting cannot end until there is a consensus on the number of points, right? A lot of times when they're working on story point, you as a BA, you are an observer. You do not indicate how many points a story will have because you do not know. There's no way you know, because you're not the one building it. At the end of an iteration, the team counts the number of story points they completed. This number is used to forecast how many story points can be completed in upcoming iterations of the same duration. So again, like I said earlier, if in sprint 1 we completed 30, in sprint 2 we completed 30, then we know that our pace, our ability is 30 per sprint. Okay, we're going to stop here today. Tomorrow we're going to continue with other terminologies. Okay, I will stop sharing my screen now so that we can take questions. So if you give me a second here. Okay. So how are we doing, class? I'd like to hear from you. I know we've talked a lot today. I'd like to hear from you. Do we have questions? Okay, I see people are raising their hands. Okay, just give me a second here. Even I am looking forward to taking your questions. Oh yeah, are you in class?
Oh yes, I am.
Okay, yeah, happy to have you in class. So if you wouldn't mind helping me, I don't know if you need to unmute or people can unmute.
Oh yeah, they can unmute it. It's been activated. They can
It's been activated. Okay, so if you wouldn't mind helping me just call the names, for people to.
Oh, okay, sure.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think we'll start with Bumi.
Hi, Abiola. Good evening. Thank you for the
evening.
class. Yeah, so I have 2 questions for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So the first one is about your explanation on EPIC and use case. I just need more clarification. I really don't understand it. Yeah.
On EPIC and use case, right? Okay.
Yes,
so,
yes. I understand that EPIC is like a high-level functionality, but I really didn't get the explanation of the use case.
Okay, so no, for sure. So a use case, let's look at the name itself, right? Use case. A use case is a case for how a functionality will be used, right? Now, when we talk about Agile, we typically don't even talk about use case. It was in Waterfall. So I talked about Waterfall, I think it was on day 1 or yesterday. Waterfall is a project methodology where we're doing a lot of building. We build for like 1 year before we bring it forward to show the customer, right? And so in Waterfall is where they use cases a lot. A use case, an example of a use case I gave was withdraw money from ATM. Okay? When you look at the use case for withdraw money from ATM, it basically talks about everything that needs to happen for a customer to be able to say, I successfully withdrew money from the ATM. So a use case is very heavy. It is big, okay? And when you're building it, you seek to build the entire use case before you show it to the customer, okay? You don't do that in Agile. Even though Agile has the concept of EPIC, which is a big functionality, you don't build an EPIC. You dissect an EPIC. You dissect it into user stories, the tiny stories that I talked about, and then you begin to build the user story. Okay? So the EPIC in Agile is the big functionality, but you don't build it unlike a use case where you actually build the use case. So let's say we draw money from ATM. The first step is insert card into the machine. Machine would ask for your password. You enter your password. Machine will process it and validate your password. If password is correct, machine will display a list of accounts and request you select an account. User will select an account. Machine would ask the user to indicate how much money they want to withdraw. See how many things I'm already listing, right? And I'm not even at the end. When you're working with a use case, you're going to build all of that. If it will take you 2 years, yes, it will take you 2 years, but you build the entire thing, right? Because you're working with a use case. However, if you're working in an Agile environment where they have an EPIC, which is a big functionality, no doubt, you're not going to build an EPIC. You see why I told you about product backlog and sprint backlog?
Yes.
When you look at the product backlog, you will see an EPIC in there. If you're using Jira or whatever tool you're using, it will be indicated in there for this EPIC, and then you see all the user stories under the EPIC. However, when we want to build functionality in a sprint, we are going to select the user stories that we want to build and move it into the sprint backlog. And we begin to build at the user story level. We're not going to try to build an EPIC. Building an EPIC just does not flow with the concept of Agile. because it is too big. In Agile, you don't build big, you build small.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah, very well. Now I know that Epic is to Agile, while use case is to waterfall.
Yeah, I definitely would say Epic is to Agile. Some people might argue with you that use case is not to waterfall and anybody can use case anyhow.
Okay.
But if you work on a project where they're using use case in Agile, somebody doesn't know what they're doing. That's how I put it. But I'm glad I was able to explain that better.
Yeah, it's much clearer now. Okay, so my second question is I just want to know, can a BA make changes to items in the project backlog? Like if, for instance, there is an error to be corrected, or who makes that correction?
A BA can, but you can only make changes to it if it has not moved into the sprint backlog.
Okay.
If it has moved into the sprint backlog, you cannot go and make a change. If a change is going to be made, a meeting must hold and the entire team must agree.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Because when it is in a sprint backlog, remember that is where the developers are looking at. That is what QA is looking at. Everybody is focused on it for the 2 weeks. So if you just go behind and you make a change, you don't want to do it. You do not want to do it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, lastly, please, I saw that you were using a project backlog, product backlog. Are they the same thing? Like, can they be used? Okay.
They can be used interchangeably.
Interchangeably, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I typically call them product backlog, but the image that I found to show called the project backlog, but it's one and the same. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem at all.
All right, Emmanuel, I think you're next.
All right, thank you, Abiola. I was just wondering, and I was trying to also wrap this around my mind as well, when you did mention a couple of things about the BA and the PO. So, because I do understand to some extent as well that what works for company A might not work for company B, right? And in reality as well, sometimes people do say that what's basically happening in the real world compared to what really happens on the book, right? So, and I was just wondering as well that, when you mentioned something about, the BA being the PO, and I know that, in a Scrum, environment sometimes or most time as well, if there is a PO, for instance, right? What is the role of a BA at that point in time? Because you also mentioned something recently. I think the last. Okay, so the last speaker as well, she did mention something about. I can't exactly remember that, but what I'm trying to say in essence is that if, for instance, the BA is the one trying to, because I know for instance that. The product owner basically is accountable for the product backlog, right? And if there is a BA in that kind of project, right? What is his role then, based on what you explained so far?
Yeah, sure. Can I answer now? Okay.
Yeah, sure.
So if you're on a project that has a PO, a product owner, and a BA, like you said, a product owner is responsible for the product. Okay, but to get the product, to deliver the product, requirements have to be documented. A product owner will not chase requirements down. A product owner will not put requirements in Jira. A product owner will not edit requirements in Jira. They would indicate what is the most important to build next. They will prioritize how we show things to the business. But the BA is the one that's going to do the groundwork. Yes. The BA is going to do almost everything related to requirements. But the BA is not a decision maker in terms of, okay, this is what we're building next. No. As a BA, your responsibility is to get the requirements ready for the team.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. Does that help?
Yeah, sure. And secondly, if you don't mind, now I understand the fact that the BA basically works, with the project's manager, and sometimes can also act as a project manager. Now, sometimes it means that it can also act as a product owner again, right?
Yeah.
And now the next question is, who does the BA report to at the end of the day? I mean, I know, everybody basically has, one issue or the other, even if you are still the top guy, in a particular, maybe you're leading a team, right? You still report to somebody. So who exactly does the BA now report to? Probably is having trouble here and there, maybe like a weekly assessment here and there for him and all that.
Yeah, good question. So I wanted to quickly address a point before answering your question. Typically, the BA should not be the PM. Those are two separate roles. Having said that, I have worked on a project where they actually hired me as a BA while working on the project that I was hired for. Another project, they had another project they needed to do. It wasn't a very big project. It was going to take, I don't know, maybe 4 months and all that. And I just said, you know what, I'll do it. I can double. And I did it. Right? Ordinarily, they should have hired a PM or given that to one of their PMs, but everybody was already at capacity, and I had capacity to do it. The other time was when the project manager slash scrum master lost her mother-in-law, and I just took on the role myself, right? And also, I'm a certified project manager. I have project management experience, so I don't shy away from these things. Don't take it upon yourself if you don't have the ability. They actually should not be asking you to do it. And if they ask you to do it, feel free to push back. If you've never done project management and somebody is bringing it to you, you will look better pushing back than saying, oh, if I say I don't want to do it, what are they going to think of me? Then you say yes and you fail at it. That failure, they would remember for a long time. Don't ever feel the pressure to say yes, yes, yes to everything. They gave you a job description when they hired you, and they need to respect it. That aside, you said who would a BA report to if they have issues? When they hire you as a BA, they would have indicated to you who you're reporting to. Even though you're working on a project, usually you would not be reporting to anybody on the project team, not the project manager, not the product owner. Usually you're reporting to like a director or somebody high up there. Usually. So if you have an issue, you should be able to discuss it with them without, because imagine if you have an issue with your boss, right? That would be bad, right? If you have an issue on the project. So typically, you're reporting to someone outside the project. In all my years of project management and BA, I have never reported to anybody on the project team.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, sure. It's actually clarified my doubts regarding that. I'm so sorry. And lastly, you also mentioned something about, the daily stand-ups here and there and all that, a BA, they are there to also talk. I mean, in terms of what happened yesterday, what are they doing today, and what are, and things like that. But I just want to understand again that for daily stand-up, my understanding is that, basically it's mainly for the BAs to really participate and speak up and talk, while other stakeholders or what have you might just participate and observe. Some people, or even the POs and what have you, maybe they always want to talk. But according to the books, right, it's mainly for the development team. But again, some other people can just, attend, not participate per se.
And
but
that's
based
the
on
key.
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so based on the explanation you gave earlier on, which I was trying to just understand better as well, that, for a BA or a PO to speak up about what I did yesterday or what I'm doing today, and if I'm having any issues, right? So that's it. Okay.
So one thing to add to what you said, you stated it clearly, is that if the BA is not the PO, the PO should really be keeping quiet if they attend the scrum. They really, really should be keeping quiet. As much as they're important, it's not their place. It's the people doing the work who should be speaking. However, if the BA is the product owner, obviously then the BA will talk, and that would be the product owner talking. Like you said, other stakeholders can attend. Ideally, they really should not be attending. They may get a bit nosy or whatever, and they want to attend.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
They really shouldn't be attending. They can attend the other ceremonies we talked about. And when they attend those ones, they're supposed to keep quiet. and not talk. They can attend for information, but the daily scrum really should be the development team. But you know, things happen, and you know, and people will want to respect them and not say, "Why are you here?" But they really shouldn't be there. I'm happy I was able to answer your questions. We'll move on.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Okay, hi, Shola.
So who's next?
Hi, Shola, can you hear us? You can unmute.
Yeah. I'm so sorry about that.
Oh, wow,
Hi.
Shola, fantastic. We can hear you today. We couldn't hear you the other day.
Good job. Good delivery. Thank you very much for today's training. My question is about the sprint plan meeting. I think Bumi mentioned something related to the question I want to answer. I want to ask, but it's slightly different. So during that meeting, you mentioned that the developers may seek clarification on some of the user stories, which the BA will have to maybe explain or something like that. Will that time when the BA is clarifying on those user stories, could the user stories be updated at the same time, or they will need a separate meeting, like you said, that they will need a meeting before they can modify the user stories they have in the sprint backlog, or they can as well be done during the sprint plan meeting?
Yeah, so it depends, right? If the clarification they're seeking is for you to write the user story more clearly, so basically you're not changing the messaging, you're just making it clearer, you're making it easier to understand, you can make that update right there in the meeting. But let's say they're asking you a question that even you know you need to take it back to the business, right? Then you're not going to edit it in that meeting. You're going to tell them you get back to them on it. You're going to take it back to the business to get the clarification. Once you get the clarification, you'd come back and you make the change.
Okay. And a second question. Yesterday, you mentioned that we'll be getting the write-up. I don't know if you still plan.
The PowerPoint?
Yeah, the PowerPoint, exactly.
Yes, you will. You get it. So we have the last class for this week tomorrow. You get it tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Thank you very much.
So someone just put in the chat, you're not the Shola we couldn't hear. Okay, I guess it's a different Shola. Okay.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah, no problem. Who's next?
Okay, so Tangu, I apologize if I didn't pronounce your name correctly, but if you can unmute.
Yeah, hello, good evening. No apologies needed. You pronounce it quite well. Thank you. Good evening, Abiola. The thing is, I've got a couple of questions, maybe about 2 or 3. I'll just quickly go through them. But thank you for the analogy on cakes, with the layering and the texture. It did put things into perspective for me. So the first question I have is for the story points. Is there like a scientific method or a standardized way of setting these story points for, ease of replication, or would every organization or maybe project team determine how to figure out, the weight to be assigned for such stories?
Yeah, so the answer to that is that they're well-established methods that people use. Each organization just chooses the one that they want to use. Like there's one called t-shirt, right? A small t-shirt, a medium t-shirt, a big t-shirt, right? There's like 10 other ones. People put it in the chat. There's Fibonacci, Fibonacci, there's planning poker, yes.
Okay.
And there's like 8 more. So each organization just determines, okay, this is the one we want to use, and they stick with it. One thing I will do that I think would be really helpful is I'll find a really good article that talks about a few of these estimation methods, and I'll share it with the team, just so you can read up on it. You will not know what your organization is using until you get there.
Perfect.
So all you can do is familiarize yourself with it. But when you get there, the estimation methods are not complicated at all. It's as easy as t-shirt sizing, like I told you. They will say every user story has to either be a small t-shirt, a medium t-shirt, or a big t-shirt. So every time we're reading a story, we're all going to say, is it a small t-shirt or is it a big t-shirt? And we all have to agree on what it is. Like, it's not any complicated method of figuring it out. No, not complicated at all.
All right, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you so much. And the next question is, you know, in some organizations, when releasing a new software, they could do it like on a phase-by-phase basis. So I just want to find out, is a phase-by-phase release of a software, can that be considered to be like an incremental approach, or it's a totally different thing?
So when you say phase-by-phase approach, what do you mean? They're releasing different parts of the software, or they're releasing better versions of the software?
No, different parts of the software. Say maybe
then
now,
that is incremental.
Okay.
Whenever you're making it bigger, you release one part and then you release another part. That's an increment. But if you release what you release today, you've given me an updated version of it. That is iterative.
All right, perfect. Thank you. And then finally, this one is though on a light note, right? I know we still have some weeks of training to go, but you know, it would be nice, hopefully in the future, to put a face to the name. Thank you.
Okay, I'll put that in mind.
All right.
All right, who's next?
Thank you, Abiola. Okay, so Adiola, do you want to mute?
Hi, Abiola.
Hello.
Okay, so my question is, you earlier mentioned MVP, that's the minimum viable product, and you spoke about the simplest solution that could possibly work out. So how early can this be introduced?
As soon as you develop the MVP, you introduce it. So the most important thing to think about is that we want to deliver the simplest thing that can work. Okay? They've asked us for a means of getting from point A to point B. Okay? And where we based on the meetings we've had with them, we've come to the conclusion that a car is the best way. So we're going to give them a car that's comfortable enough to get them from point A to point B. But we're not going to put gold rings, and we're not going to put those flashing headlights, right? Because they don't need the flashing headlights for them to get from point A to point B. Will flashing headlights be good? Of course. Will gold rings be classy? Absolutely. But they don't need gold rings to get from A to B. Does that help, Adiola? So from the beginning, when we look at all of the requirements, we're going to select the group of requirements that we can use to deliver the MVP. And those are the ones we're going to focus on. Once we deliver the MVP and there's still time and money to be spent, we can then begin to look at all the other requirements that are not absolutely necessary, but are wanted. There's a class we have in the future where we're going to talk about the categories of requirements, you know, which requirements are a must-have, that if you don't deliver those requirements, the project has failed. Which requirements I should have, you know, we should have this. Which ones are nice to have? I am very hungry right now. What I really need is food, but if you give me a bottle of Coke with it, that would be fantastic. The bottle of Coke is a nice to have. The food is a necessity.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Okay. And my second question is about product owner. You also said that as a product owner, the person has to be highly knowledgeable about the product. So my question is, have you ever experienced a situation whereby you once had a product owner and their level of knowledge is, it's not, how do I put it? I'm looking for the best word to use now. Like the person is not really knowledgeable like that. So what extent?
Thank goodness I've not been in that situation. That would be very, very frustrating. Having the product owners that I've worked with have been really good. Like they've really known the product really well. Having said that, if it was in a situation where they had a product owner who didn't really know the product, the BA would just need to do more.
Okay.
Yeah, you'd need to do more. You'd need to basically compensate for that lack of knowledge on the part of the product owner.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. We're running out of time, so let's go with the questions.
All right, thanks. Tim, did you mind putting your hand down as well as Adiola? So we'll move on to Dawn. Hello. Hi, we can hear you. Okay, great. Hi. So I have like not necessarily like a lot of questions, but just a series that overlap, I guess. So I was wondering, because you mentioned waterfall and before, and you went through Scrum as well as Agile with us today. I was wondering, are those the only 3 types of methodologies that a BA would have to work with? Or
okay. Oh, should I answer?
Yes, please.
Okay, no, those are not the only ones. There's probably like 5 other ones. I believe I have slides that will cover it, but you probably would never have to deal with them in your BA experience. In my experience, in the many number of projects that I've worked on, I've hardly even worked on waterfall. That's how dated waterfall is. Most companies are going towards Agile. And that's where you want to get comfortable as a BA. No Agile in and out. Know about Scrum. All those other ones, they exist in name, but I haven't really seen where they've been used. And I mean, I'll humbly say that I've worked in really big organizations, government establishments, health authorities, insurance companies, really big thousands of employees, and these other methodologies they don't even come up. But to your question, there are other ones. It's not just Agile and waterfall.
Okay, that's great. That's good to know. And I was also wondering, are we as RBs expected to come into the job with the knowledge of these methodologies, or are they something that is like they train you on, or they just expect you to come in armed with them?
Yeah, they will typically expect you to come in knowing Agile, right? If it's an Agile environment. And honestly, what you'd need to know is not any more than what I've just taught you in class. Be able to follow the topic. When they're talking about the ceremonies, know what the ceremonies are about. Know what ceremony happens when. But the expectation is you come in and they talk about Agile and you're not looking lost because you get it, right? But by get it, I mean, if all you know is what I've just taught you about Agile, you'll be fine.
Okay, got it. And is it in any way, is there a way to decipher what type of methodology a company is using based on their job posting, or is that something that you find out once you go in for an interview?
Yeah, typically, they may indicate in the job description, and if they don't, it will come up in the interview. Companies that are Agile, they're very upfront about it because they want people who are Agile. They don't want somebody with a waterfall mindset on an Agile project. So they'll be upfront about it. You will know before day one, you will know.
Okay, the last question, I'm sorry, guys. My last question is, I'm having a little dilemma with the increment iteration thing, because it's something that just in English language is not the same as in computer science or VA, basically, because they sound a lot like synonyms, like they sound like they're piggybacking on each other, and it just seems like they're 2 different things on here. So
what I'm gonna do, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to call you short. I was just
go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I'll spend a bit more time talking about iteration and increments tomorrow, maybe about 10 minutes, right? But I want to save the 3 minutes that we have left because I see 2 other hands raised, and who knows, maybe the questions about iteration and incremental as well. So if you don't mind, Dawn, can I answer that question tomorrow? Can I tell you?
Sure, no problem. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. So we have 2 more hands.
Yeah. Adekola, do you mind unmuting?
Yeah. Hi, Abiola. Thank you so much. I really enjoyed the class today, and your examples are very relatable, and great presentation overall. So I have a couple of questions, but I'm just going to limit my question to, topic for today, and I'll probably save all the others. They're just my curiosity about some things I'm thinking about, so they're not really relevant to today. So I'll just maybe bring them up later. So my question will be that so the agile methodology and the Scrum team, do those only apply to just IT projects? And if the answer is no, what other projects, and just a quick, I don't know, we don't have time, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I know that they're well known in IT projects, right? But I believe that then it's not just limited to IT. I guess even in maybe manufacturing, you'd have it in there, right? Where you're building in small increments and then growing it, making it bigger. I wouldn't really speak to it again because our focus here is really on like IT projects, even if it's not application development, but within the IT realm where you get hired as a BA. But I would want to believe it's not limited to that alone, and that it would apply in like other industries as well that are not software related. What is the context of your question, though? I'm curious.
Because from the sprints and all, and the Scrum review, we're talking about the sprints. We're talking about this, that is the space for the developers, right? And what do developers do?
Right.
Yeah. So that's what sparked my curiosity.
Okay, yeah, no, like I said, I don't think that it's the use of agile methodology is limited to just IT projects, right? Even there's a terminology I'm trying to remember now, and it just escapes me. But I don't know if you've heard about just-in-time development, right? Where, and this is in manufacturing, where certain parts of a product, they're delivered just in time for it to go to the customer. It's a way that in manufacturing, they've saved a lot on stockpiling parts of a product. So they develop it as it is needed and they push it out to the customer. That in itself is not agile, but it's very similar in concept to agile. So again, I would say I don't think it's only agile. Sorry, I don't think agile only applies to like IT projects. I believe that they use it in other fields as well. People, I know it's 8 o'clock, but if you give us a few more minutes, I think we have just one more question and we'll be done.
Okay, so can I go ahead and ask? I'll be pretty quick.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks again for your time and the class. My question is on user story. Where does user story come to play? Is it in requirement gathering or in documentation or in, yeah, that's just my question. Where does it come to play? Where do you need it? Where do you need to write a user story? Is it in requirement gathering?
So basically, in your requirement gathering, you're interfacing with the stakeholders and they're telling you their requirements. When they're telling you the requirement, they're not going to tell you user story form, right? They're just going to tell you about the day-to-day and what they do. However, when you want to communicate it to the developers, you're not going to take that story the way you've written it and give it to the developers. You as the BA will translate it into user stories.
Okay,
once
so
you
that's
translate
requirement gathering, right?
So you do your requirement gathering, you meet with the stakeholders and get the requirement from them. Okay, if agile methodology is what you're following, with user stories, you will then take the requirements they've given you and write user stories based on the requirements.
Okay.
So the stakeholder tells you, I need to do this, and then I need to do that, and this needs to happen before that happens. That's how they're going to communicate it to you.
Okay.
And then when they're telling you all of that, you say, so you just told me you need to do this. Why do you need to do it? And who exactly does it? They'll be like, oh, yes, the accounting manager does it. This is what they do, and this is why they do it. That's your user story. But they are not going to tell you in user story verbiage, right? Based on what they've told you, you will then go away and write it out as your user story. As the accounting manager, I need to be able to do this so that I can achieve that.
Okay.
Right. The user story is what the developers need from you. The developers cannot consume that requirement the way you got it from the business.
Okay. Yeah, that's clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Well, thanks everyone. I hope we got through all of the questions that we have today. If we didn't get to your question, please bring it in tomorrow's class. Tomorrow we're going to finish lesson 3. It's not going to take us the whole time, so we'll have more time for questions. Thanks everyone for your time and your patience. I hope that you feel like you know more about Agile and you're excited about working as a BA. I'm rooting for you. I know you can do it. If I can do it, you totally can do it. I look forward to connecting with you tomorrow. Have a good evening.